I want to take a moment to acknowledge that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huichen, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone people. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people, and we recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. Consistent with the university values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship with Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and our commitment to hold the university more accountable to the needs of American Indians and Indigenous peoples. I also want to thank our many sponsors that made this event possible. The Asian American Research Center, the Asian American and Diaspora Studies program, the Department of English, the Townsend Center for the Humanities, Japanese American Studies Advisory Committee, the Center for Japanese Studies, and the Othering and Belonging Institute. A special thanks to English for offering this beautiful space for us to host this event. I also want to acknowledge the advisory group of the Asian American Research Center. Many of the faculty in English have participated in the planning of this series. So Colleen Lai, Andrew, as well as Stephen, if he's here, and Poloni also was essential in planning this as well. So a big thank you to all of you. And of course, this is our last event in this series, and I have to just give special thanks to our staff, who have been phenomenal. I mean, we really, really could not have done it without them. Deborah, who is here, thank you. Max, I think he's probably online hosting the Zoom. He's not on, but
no Zoom today.
No Zoom today.
In person only.
Okay,
in person
here,
only. You're getting it.
Yes, and we are recording it. Max, who has been really critical in getting the technology and the logistics together. I also want to thank Jess Jang, who's here somewhere. There she is. Just been phenomenal, and really coordinating, everything around the series. So a huge thanks. So when the AARC, ARC, Asian American Research Center, was founded, we had the intention of creating a hub, and really a space where we can build an intellectual community on campus with people doing different works, on Asian American studies, largely broadly defined, and also to build a community between the campus and the larger Asian American communities around this area and the country. And one of the things that we really wanted to do was to create an artist in residence program, so that we can showcase the wonderful, creative, invigorating work that's being done by Asian Americans. And we just, we've seen this explosion of work in the past 20, 30 years of Asian American creativity along so many different kinds of creative work, not only in novels, but films, photography, poetry, etc. So it's just been truly amazing. And when we began this, began to think about who to bring for the inaugural Artist in Residence, Karen Tei Yamashita, came to mind immediately. I couldn't think of a better person in terms of her range of work. She has produced 7 books and more, plays, etc. It is really stellar, and she's done work that continues to break boundaries. In every single book, she has done something different. She has employed different sets of methodologies. She has broken sort of genres, in her writing, and this is just so incredibly inspirational to all of us kind of doing work on representing, narrativizing our histories and our experiences. I first met Karen about 25 years ago now, I was thinking back, through a mutual friend of ours, Rashni Ristamji Kearns. The reason we came together was through a common interest on Asians in Latin America. And I found out then that Karen had lived, in Brazil for 10 years. And this is where she produced her first 2 books, on Through the Arc of the Rainforest, followed by Brazil Maru. And when I remember reading that first book, I had never laughed so much in my life. And I was thinking, this is the first novel written by an Asian American writer that made me, feel this kind of joy, this sort of, lightness of being. And it was back then that I realized, her genius and her work, and she continued, with the Brazil Maru, and I took that book with me to the field. I didn't bring many books with me. I might have brought like 4 or 5, and I wanted to make sure that I brought a creative work with me to inspire a different kind of writing, in ethnography. And that book, was specifically on Japanese migrants, the first generation of migrants that went to Brazil. And she really kind of took in the different perspectives of people to tell us a story, the full story, the complex story of how these immigrants adjusted, settled to life, in Brazil. She had gone there with a Thomas Watson Fellowship to do that work, and then she came back to Los Angeles, where she worked on translations and screenplays and produced dramatic works such as Hana Kuso, An American Buto, Tokyo Carmen versus LA Carmen, and No Bozos. And then she followed up with 5 other books. I mean, this woman is just incredible, in terms of her, how prolific she's been and her creative energy exploding in so many different directions. Again, her texts really address a broad range of themes: migration, interraciality, environmentalism, family, memory, and Asian American social movements. And I have to say that while she has been here for a week, she's able to converse with people from across the disciplines, whether they're historians or anthropologists or ethnic studies or Asian American studies or English and comparative literature. This is the kind of work that she does in terms of bringing communities together, synthesizing the different themes, the different ways of engaging with her work, through her work, and it's just incredible. So I'm not a literary critic. I'm not an English. I am a cultural anthropologist, so it feels a little bit odd for me to speak to an audience who might be might be from English. So I'm just going to share a couple of thoughts, as a cultural anthropologist engaging Karen's work in the spirit of interdisciplinarity. Two of the things that I really, really appreciate about Karen's work is her sense of commitment to truth, history, and she employs a lot of the ethnographic methods in interviewing in oral history. I think that we read her work as fiction, but that fiction is actually rooted in tremendous, tremendous research with communities and engaging with them in every step of the way. And I think her work has been called fictional ethnography. It's been called historical fiction. But whatever name that we give it, what she does is she brings to life the experiences of people and their truths in many ways. And there's the way in which anthropology interfaces with that is that we have a tremendous investment in ethnography and in writing, in representation. And this is where I feel like, so many anthropologists have turned novelists and poets. I'm thinking about Amitav Ghosh, Kiran Narayanan, and of course my own advisor, Renato Rosaldo, who went from being an award-winning ethnographer to an award-winning poet. So there are many sort of affinities, of ethnography and creative writing. in that sense, and I really feel a deep connection to Karen's work and her process. And her work, and I realize the other thing that connects to anthropology is that we, as anthropologists, are trying to denaturalize. One of the things we're trying to do is to denaturalize the everyday, right? I'm thinking about Nasarima as one of the key articles in anthropology where we make American life, completely distorted to make it foreign to us, to denaturalize what we know, and to see sort of, in some ways, the unusualness, the constructedness of what we do. And her work does that as well, but she spins it with a particular creativity that makes the everyday life, she brings out the absurdity of our everyday life and then shows it back to us, and in that sense, she kind of denaturalizes the way that we think and see the world so that we kind of can understand the humor, the curiousness, and really the absurdity, the preposterousness of what it means to be human living in our reality sometimes. So with that context, I'm going to just turn and make sure I give her a proper formal introduction here. Karen Tei Yamashita was born in Oakland, California. Her parents were both survivors of incarceration at the Topaz internment camp during World War II. She is currently Professor Emerita of Literature and Creative History at the University of California at Santa Cruz. Yamashita is the author of 8 books, traversing short stories, memoir, and novel, all published by Coffee House Press, including Through the Arc of the Rainforest, Brazil Maru, Tropicals, Anime Wong, and I Hotel, which was the finalist for the National Book Award, the American Book Award, the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association Award, and the Association for Asian American Studies Book Award. Her most recent publication, Sansei and Sensibility, is a collection of buoyant and inventive stories where Yamashita transfers classic tales across boundaries and questions what an inheritance, familial, cultural, emotional, artistic, really means. In addition to these awards for her specific books and projects, she also has received numerous awards for her body of work. Just to name a few, she was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters from the National Book Award, the John Dos Passos Prize for Literature, and a U.S. Artists Ford Foundation Fellowship. And as I mentioned, today's event is a series, is part of a series. And if you have traveled with us and journeyed with us in the past week, you would have seen the kind of the arrays of work where we covered speculative fiction on looking at Asian Latinx intersections. We covered embodied memories of Japanese Americans. And last night we had a wonderful event of I Hotel, which looks at the social movement in San Francisco to save the International Hotel. And we're concluding today with her keynote here on Cartographies of the Anthrobscene. She's been with us all week. She has visited, classes, and we've had, the real great honor and pleasure of engaging with her, across these multiple texts. And it is such an honor, really, to have her here with us. And I cannot think of a better person to launch this Artist in Residence program for the AARC. Today we're going to hear about her newest project. And we have with us here also her 2 collaborators that made this possible. Dr. Tim Yamamura is filmmaker and scholar and earned his PhD in literature from UCSC, where he wrote the UC Pacific Rim dissertation, award-winning dissertation on science fiction in the US and Japan. Tim has taught English courses at UCSC as well as Northern Arizona University. We also have Ronaldo Lopes de Oliveira working here, and he worked as an architect, but he's also a sculptor, a visual artist, a filmmaker, and a storyteller. And, I may say, Karen's partner. So welcome both of you, and thank you so much for being with us. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Karen to present this world premiere of her project. And thank you for your immense generosity for being with us this week, and thank you for being our inaugural artist in residence. Welcome.
Well, I want to reiterate my thanks to the staff. I won't say all your names again, but you've been amazing all this week. Thank you for your guidance and help and your tech advice, everything you've done. It's been simply amazing, and I'm really honored. And when we talked about doing this last year, Lok and I went back and forth, and Lok had these ideas, and I had said to Lok, you know, she had these academic panels on my work, and I said, can we not do that? I really don't want to be in the audience thinking that I'm dead. And she agreed, and we put together really a fun week. The conversations I had with the women of the iHotel and rethinking the iHotel in terms of women and their participation in the movement, I think that was really quite wonderful, and I was so pleased and honored to be there just to hear them again. And you know, I had interviewed them so many years ago, and I thought, man, maybe I really screwed up. But one thing I do say about them is that I learned so much, and it was their lives and their stories were a gift to me. And then I had the conversation with Phil Gotanda, so much fun. He brought a bottle of wine, and we kind of got drunk on stage. We talked about so many things, but our lives have intersected since we were kids, really. And I met him very early in my career, and before we were ever worked in theater. He went on to really work in theater. He became one of our, you know, stellar dramatists in our community, and I kind of followed him around, but we were always kind of doing similar kinds of things. When he did Godzilla, I thought about Godzilla. When he thought about the Siamese twins, I was thinking about Siamese, I don't know. And we were doing this rather independently. So I don't know, maybe we're Siamese twins? So that was really wonderful. And also the first panel with Alex Rivera and Seshu Foster. Seshu Foster, I've known him for years and really always admired his work. And then I met Alex soon after, and I thought he was brilliant. I thought it was really wonderful that they agreed to come and talk about their work and the speculative and just not only just Latino but also people of color, and how the literature of folks of color in the speculative realm that's what it's all about, I think. I mean, we just saw this crazy film that came out, everything. And if that's not speculative, I don't know what that was. So I wanted to thank you to the Asian American Research Center, which is locked right now, and all of you who are participating, and also to the English department today. So here's this talk, and it's excerpted from a presentation I gave at the Huntington Library and Museum for the James Joyce Conference last year in 2022. And I'll be presenting two projects, one in collaboration with Ronaldo Lopes de Oliveira, who is an artist and storyteller, architect, many things. That will be the Manifesto Anthrobscene. And second in collaboration with Tim Yamamura, filmmaker, Trekking to Delta, or Cosmic Rays, I guess. Okay, here we go. So, to begin, this manifesto is a collaboration with Ronaldo and his art. It was published in McSweeney's journal, Plundered, edited by Valeria Luiselli. And in this work, I wanted to link the modernist movement of James Joyce and his generation of European and American writers to the modernist moment of Brazilian writers, and to propose a cartography set over the Amazon forest. In 1729, Irish writer Jonathan Swift wrote the satirical essay, A Modest Proposal, in which he proposed that the poor and hungry could sell and eat their babies. Within the text of the essay, Swift also noted the Tupinambu, a Brazilian indigenous tribe said to practice cannibalism, of learning to love our country, wherein we differ even from the inhabitants of Tupinambu. In 1922 marks the commencement of Brazilian modernism and the Semana de Arte Moderna, the Week of Modern Art in São Paulo. And during that week, coincidentally also February, around about Carnival, the artists, musicians, poets, and writers involved were booed and condemned by critics and the press. So as you know, in 1922 is also the year of the publication of Joyce's Ulysses. So it is that on two sides of the Atlantic, a century ago, literary and artistic provocations were in movement. A few years later, in 1928, one of the organizers of the Semana de Arte Moderna, Brazilian poet Oswald de Andrade, published the Manifesto Anthrobscene, or the Cannibal Manifesto, in which he declared Brazil's artistic strength to be its ability and right to cannibalize other cultures. A famous line from Andrade's manifesto also references the Tupi, the indigenous tribe known for cannibalism. Tupi or not Tupi? That is the question. The Brazilian's word seems also contemplating Hamlet. One more note. As you know, tales of cannibalism are a part of ancient mythology. In Homer's tale, the hero Odysseus, with a dozen ships, enters the bay off the city of Telepolis, where he and his men are attacked by the Laestrygonians, a cannibalistic giants. And Odysseus escapes in one ship, but all others perish, and well, we assume these men were lost and were eaten. In Joyce's Ulysses, in the chapter Laestrygonians, Leopold Bloom at noon enters a dining establishment of eating men and is repulsed by their gluttony. So to begin with, a modest proposal, a modest manifesto, o Manifesto Anthrobscene. It is befitting to commemorate the 466 years since the Caetê ate Bishop Pedro Fernandes Sardinha and some 30 of his companions. What a feast! Clink glasses and make hearty toast with vintage Bishop Sardinha. Saúde! When Pedro Álvares Cabral discovered Brazil for the Portuguese on April 22nd, 1500, there were 11 million Indians in 2,000 tribes. In the next 100 years, 90% of these people were wiped out. For those who prefer the cocktail, the muddled balls of Cabral in lime and minty sugar doused in cachaça, chin-chin. In 1541, in search of El Dorado, Francisco de Orellana discovered the Amazon River, traversing it from Iquitos on the Napo River to its great mouth on the Atlantic Ocean. For appetizers, commence with Francisco de Orellana's right ear, wrapped in gold leaf and pickled with hints of guaraná, cinnamon, clove, and café. In 1550, Hans Staden was taken prisoner by Jepio Wasu and Alkinda Midi of the Tupinamba. brought to the coastal village of Ubatuba and ritually prepared to be eaten. Additionally, a French pâté of Hans Statten's left big toe and liver on a thin, carefully crafted tapioca crepe. In 1799, Alexander von Humboldt encountered on the Orinoco River 2 Amazon parrots who continued to speak the dead language of the extinct Maipure people. The first course might be a cabbage and manioc stew of the butt of Alexander von Humboldt. From 1848 to 1859, Henry Walter Bates explored the Amazon from the Tocantins River to the Tefé River in the upper Amazon, collecting 14,714 mostly insect species, 8,000 of which were said to be previously unknown. An interlude to cleanse the palate. A sorbet of the lymph nodes of Henry Walter Bates, laden with edible orchids. In 1911, Theodore Koch Grunberg traveled from Manaus up the Rio Branco to Mount Roraima, documenting the legends of the Pimon people. In 1928, Mario de Andrade published the novel Macunaíma, based on the stories lifted from Theodore Koch Grunberg's ethnographic narratives. Second course, a spicy coconut and palm oil muqueca of the tender breast of Theodore Koch Grunberg. Percy Harrison Fawcett disappeared in 1925 while traveling from Cuiabá and crossing the upper Xingu River on an expedition to discover the lost city of Z. Ai, que preguiça. Today, 300 to 400 indigenous tribes live in the Amazon, 50 of whom do not have contact with the outside world. The doctor recommends a settler colonoscopy every 50 years. For 400 years, starting in 1501, almost 5 million enslaved Africans were transported to Brazil. By the end of the 16th century, fugitives from slavery established Mocambo or Quilombo communities, many hidden in the Amazon. French Revolution tomorrow. Human rights for happiness the day before yesterday. Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery, which it did in 1888. Eat, drink, and be carnival for tomorrow? 3,000 contemporary Quilombos have been officially recognized since 1988. Although half lack land titles, they are spread over 50 million acres, mostly in the Amazon. Recycling what goes in must come out. Life in the Amazon's trees exists in 5 stories: floor, shrub, understory, canopy, overstory, each layer comprising a unique plant and animal ecosystem. There is no sin below the equator. Technology must be employed to protect and preserve the unique Amazonian environment, to continue to study the study of its complex ecological systems, and to discover its rich and still unknown biomedical resources. You eat, therefore you are. To preserve the Amazon, the vast ecosystem and its inhabitants, the Earth's largest gaming reserve will be established. Deforestation for cattle, sugar, and soy production will be permitted only outside the perimeters of the Amazon. While this may result in a scarcity of beef, ethanol, and tofu, the price of these commodities will rise. Dieting for a small planet. Timber, oil, and mineral extraction will cease within the boundaries of the Amazon. In exchange, Brazil will garner IMF bartering credits calculated to match losses amounting to trillions of dollars. the rest of the planet will pay Brazil for the precious oxygen expelled by the capacious lungs of the Amazon. Breathe in, breathe out. Unite the mind with air. A no-fly zone must be adopted to preserve the purity of the area and to prohibit all outside contact. In addition to electronic fencing, satellite sensor technologies will be employed to secure the border, conduct surveillance, and to collect data. As the Amazon biome is the single major preserve of Brazil, its security will depend on the strict coordination of and enforcement by the country's Army, Navy, and Air Force. Capitalizing on the eternal prosperity of humanity. A return to free nomadic living over a great expanse of preserved land area will promote exercise and greater health. Higher worth will be given to pure indigenous or non-contact peoples. Toward the preservation of African cultures and histories of the enslaved. The primary concern will be to produce a highly organic and pure native food source. DNA testing can substantiate the purity of the species. Sex or food, food or sex, you choose. Careful calibration of age, sex, weight, and body mass will involve a qualified team of doctors and researchers. Optimal preservation of healthy bodies within a natural and original environment will create the most excellent model of healthcare on Earth. Toward the preservation of indigenous cultures. Embedded chip technology may not disturb or interfere with body art, such as tattoos or piercings. A commission of researchers will convene yearly to decide on the appropriate hunting season, number and selection of Amazonians for eating. Strict regulation about how to hunt will be enforced. For example, no firearms will be allowed, only primitive methods, arrows, spears, darts, knives. Any traps must be pre-approved. Save Indians by making them Indians again. The kill must be clean so as to preserve the integrity of the meat. Michelin star chefs will compete to craft the most sophisticated recipes. However, only 10% of these recipes may be based on foreign influences, defining a cuisine original to the Amazon, initiating a study of Amazonian food sources. Eat everything before you die. The rich matrimony of Amazonian plant life, fruits, roots, fungi, bulbs, palm, flowers, etc., and animal life, fish, birds, reptiles, monkeys, tapirs, etc., as well as their hallucinogenic and medicinal properties, should afford new avenues of culinary pleasure. Save the Amazon. Eat the noble savage. Signed, Washington, Chateaubriand, Silva, in the 466th year of the eating of Bishop Pedro Fernandez Sardinha. Now journeying away from cartography to the modern world in 1922, I'd like to visit another cartography set in the Great Basin of Utah. The film accompanying this essay is the work of filmmaker Tim Yamamura, and this is part of a longer essay, so I'm going to just read a little portion. Cosmic rays. For starters, try cosmic rays. Some people drive into Delta, Utah to find cosmic rays. What are cosmic rays? On 648 Main Street, there's the University of Utah Lon and Mary Watson Cosmic Ray Center, where the history of cosmic ray research and telescope array observatory is explained. The observatory is not a great dome on a mountain with a gigantic lens on a roaming tube. Instead, it's a lineup of what looks like rusty beds with solar panel headboards spread across the nearby desert. The Cosmic Ray Center describes all this. The center also includes a display about the Topaz internment camp, the remains of which are a square mile, also in the middle of the nearby desert, and where my family was incarcerated during World War II. What I want to know is, what do cosmic rays captured in rusty beds have to do with the imprisonment of Japanese Americans? Delta? I located on Google, mapped as a dry delta in the desert landscape, made an alluvial town by the convergence of two Utah state highways, 6 from the north and 50 from the west. A misshapen triangle of refuge and home. I eye the fuzzy satellite overlay of the present crisscross of streets and houses set among the plotted fields of rural green. If I continue to pull upward and scan the landscape, maybe I can catch a field of rusty cosmic ray beds and the lonely square of barren land where the slabs of broken foundations of barracks, mess halls, hospital, warehouse, latrines, corralled by barbed wire, are the ruined remains of a prison's wartime existence. Pull away further and delta and everything gets swallowed up into a big, white, elongated, alkaline amorphous glob that extends 20,000 square miles, covering most of Utah, parts of Idaho, and Nevada. This white expanse is the dried up remains of Lake Bonneville, the largest Pleistocene lake in the Great Basin of the West. 30,000 years later today, the Great Salt Lake, Utah Lake, and Sevier Lake are the only wet remnants of this vast and ancient sea. And no doubt about it, just like the famous Bonneville Salt Flats, the 1 square mile of the Topaz concentration camp sits right there in that flat alkaline expanse. Now for a moment, zoom back into Topaz and consider that here, in December 1942, a group of writers and artists inaugurated the first of 3 issues of a mimeograph pamphlet titled Trek. In the April 1943 issue, on page 37, there appears a title banner, Lake Bonneville, inscribed over a sketch of the desert mesa. A long, friendly brontosaurus trudging past. This artwork was drawn by Mine Okubo, and the article that follows was by Tim Yamamura. Quote, to picture the extent of Lake Bonneville during its prime, imagine the level of the Great Salt Lake rising 1,000 feet. Most of Utah would be submerged. Topaz would be under 600 feet of water, and the Mormon temple in Salt Lake City under 850 feet. The length of this vast Pleistocene lake extended from Cache Bay to the south end of Escalante Bay to a distance of 346 miles. Its extreme width, from the mouth of the Spanish Fork Canyon to a point on the Shoshone Range near Dendon Pass, predates Lake Bonneville by possibly 100 million years, but who's counting? Somewhere out there are the dinosaurs' bones. Guts turned into petroleum, skin into dust. Time reckoned in millions of years places everything into absurd perspective. Tim Yamamura's geology lesson is an existential reset. Even if there were only 3 issues of Trek in each, the editors included an article or 2 about the land and its place in time and history. I believe they needed to understand where in the world they'd landed. These articles are about the geographic landmarks of the Pavant Valley, the 1776 expedition of Father Escalante from Santa Fe to Millard County, and the fossil science of trilobites in the Antelope Valley, all penned by Frank A. Beckwith, publisher of Millard County Chronicle. It turns out that these Trekkies had met Beckwith, who was the local scholar, an autodidact with an insatiable curiosity and passion to know this land and its people. I think of Trek as a creative and intellectual convergence. Through their writing, the contributors reveal their personal interests and characters. There is Toshio Mori's earnestness, the terse realism of Jim Yamada, Mine Okubo's keen wit, Toyo Suemoto's gentle lyrics, and the linguistic jabberwocky of Globularius Sharaobi, the pen name for Jim Oki. These were writers and artists at a juncture, honing skills, critically expectant of an uncertain future. Finally, Trek is a curious document, an eclectic mix of art, poetry, fiction, linguistic satire, essay, history, geography, ethnography, and information. You get a sense of a temporary endeavor to mark the time and place. The creators refer to themselves as zombies, consumed with their tasks, but their writing and thinking seems to be in preparation to propel themselves eventually away. Thus, Trek's articles advise about jobs, schooling, military service, and reports from out there. This interim activity is a trek in time. I first read about the convergence of Bonneville Lake and Topaz Camp in Border Waters, a book by Brian Russell Roberts, English professor at Brigham Young University in Provo, who, while writing about the archipelagic world of oceans and islands, discovered that his own home was an ancient sea. Visiting the Topaz Museum, Roberts became fascinated with the examples of carved slate containing trilobite fossils, and drew from these objects the wondrous complexity of their meaning in time. Sometime after Frank A. Beckwith published his article in Trek in 1943, Trilobite Fossils of the Antelope Springs, the Topaz Slate Club was founded with a workplace equipped with grindstone and cutting tools. Topaz residents hosted a camp at Antelope Springs where folks camped and hiked on expeditions to find trilobite fossils. Trilobites were marine anthropods existing in oceans from the early Cambrian for 270 million years. A trilobite fossil, which might be one of 22,000 species, looks like a beetle with a wavy, roe-like carapace and many spindly legs. Among the articles carved from slate were suzuri or inkstone, on which an ink block is ground with water to make sumi ink for calligraphy and painting. Roberts described the topaz suzuri embedded with trilobite. On one carving, a frog, sculpted to encase a trilobite fossil, is set to jump into the stone's ink pond, reminding the calligrapher of Basho's iconic haiku. Roberts speculates that while the stone may date 2 billion years, the once living trilobite, who marks the beginnings of life on Earth, has a biological evolution going back 3.5 billion years. But again, who's counting? For Roberts, there is the leap of the Cambrian trilobite fused into the Devonian amphibian, into the Pleistocene Bonneville Lake, the slurry of black in a slate pond, the sudden epiphany of the imprisoned poet onto paper. Or perhaps the quick and precise sumiate brushstrokes of the imprisoned artist Chiura Obata, looking beyond the barbed wire fence, his constant moon rising in the twilight sky. Over time, it is evident that the barbed wire fence around Topaz became, if not porous, less confining, that people were free to leave to explore the terrain, gather tiny shells abandoned by ancient lake mollusks, search for geodes with hidden gemstones, identify limestone shale with trilobite fossils. In December 1942, just before Christmas, on excursion to Topaz Mountain, Kozo Fukugai lost his way. The Topaz Times reports more than 1,000 residents assisted by airplanes, horsemen, shepherds, and a score of administrative staff, including school teachers, have gone over the entire area. Beacon flyers lit the whole mountain area Sunday and Monday nights and buglers drawn from the Boy Scout troops have been on duty regularly in hope that either by sight or by sound the missing man could be directed to the searching party. 3 days later, trackers on horseback found Fukugai on the desert sand 10 miles west of Mount Topaz, prostrate but alive. You could leave, but where would you go? How would you survive in that alkaline desert? There was the open ostracism of being the enemy, the bureaucratic processing and loyalty questionnaire for release or continuing punishment, the psychological barrier of the fence itself. But to leave for short periods, to wander near the streams and mountains, to sit among the trees, to lie in the earth and look up into the night sky, to be free. So perhaps folks joined a geological club like the Topaz Lapidary Society that may give them the opportunity to explore the world outside. On September 27, 1944, 2 lapidary enthusiasts, Yoshio Nishimoto and Akio Ujihara, set out on an expedition to find chalcedony in the Drum Mountains 16 miles northwest of Topaz. There they discovered a strange rock, the size of a potato sack and the color of burnt sienna, with thumbprints called regmaglyphs, patterning its surface. Striking the thing with a hammer, it sounded metal. In fact, it was the iron-nickel meteorite weighing 1,165 pounds, the largest meteorite ever found in Utah. Over the years, Frank A. Beckwith corresponded with the Smithsonian and contributed research articles and dozens of fossils to their collection. As noted in Trek, the Smithsonian Institute gave a fossil of the class Meritome, order Aglaspedida, the family name Beckwith Day, in his honor. Likely, it was Beckwith who connected Nishimoto and Ujihara with the Institute. Correspondence back and forth revealed the precarity of the 2 men imprisoned by wartime racism and queried the possibility for a fair settlement. Ujihara wrote, "The pleasure is mine to communicate with the great scientists like Mr. Henderson through our finding, which was merely an accident. As for myself, I lost my home, business, and major part of my savings due to the evacuation. But it is only infinitesimal compared to the millions of people in war zones. My only desire is that by this incident it may benefit to the scientific world, and in some way it may open a way to establish a better world for the coming generations." Nishimura and Ujihara received a total of $700 from the Institute's endowment fund, and many years later in 1950, each received a 6-ounce polished and etched slice of the meteorite, today displayed in the Natural History Museum of the Smithsonian. I think about this meteorite, a space rock that penetrated the Earth's surface, managed to get through the atmosphere before burning up into a shooting star. This space rock made it to Earth. The report estimated that the Drum Mountains meteorite sat in place for a century before 2 Japanese Americans from the Lapidary Society came along to find it. At this juncture, I return to cosmic rays. I imagine magical traveling light, particles of iridescence, light-time travelers, X-rays that see what can't be seen. Space.com says that cosmic rays are atom fragments that rain down on the Earth from outside of the solar system. They blaze at the speed of light and have been blamed for electronic problems in satellites and other machinery. Even with this definition, I will never really discover the connection between cosmic rays and Japanese American incarceration. It's a non sequitur and a mystery, perhaps a confusion, that suggests alternate universes, the great and indifferent distance between supernovas and the human concerns of social justice. Can we be in two places, two universes at the same time? Honor the immensity of space and the insignificance of our living existence. It's a mind stretch. My job might be to roll a giant rock out of the desert and return it to its mountain home, repatriate it, so to speak. I stand with the rock at the precipice of Mount Topaz and marvel at the view. But the rock tumbles back down the mountainside, and so forth. We'll have the myth. So it begins again, because I need to climb again to the precipice, craving that brief moment that I can see and marvel. This is my zombie dreaming, cosmic beds, waiting to be beamed up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. I had a question about how you work with scale. I'm really taken by this phrase they used, which is settler colonoscopy. So, how you bring together settler colonialism, which, in terms of an abstract concept, but also something with real effects, how you bring that into, this idea of the body and how, things become materialized on the scale of the body. And also with this, second kind of question around, the cosmic rays relationship to Japanese incarceration as a part of your own kind of story, of your own, your own self. So if you could say something about how you manage these different scales, that would be wonderful.
Did I manage them? They are two different projects, but I thought they were linked by, and I think you know they're linked. With the project of the Bonneville and the Great Basin, I wanted to think about this, space and deep and long time. And that scale, you can't go to Utah, you can't go into that desert without thinking that there's something happened here that is millennial, but planetary and billions of years. And so you feel small, and that's what you feel. At the same time, a very tragic event happened there that's personal to me, so then I have to come back to myself and think, what's going on? So I was trying to think about the huge, large picture and the existential picture, but also what the folks in Trek thought at the time. They got to this place, and it was absolutely absurd that they were there and wrong and unjust. And yet, they had to try to understand this in a larger context. And so I'm just invoking, that existential moment. But yeah, scale. I think that's what thinking about the Anthropocene has been for many of us. Like, what do we think? Feels like things are ending with the global changes, but they're ending very significantly in different ways, and we're going to see changes that we did not imagine. And then what are we doing about it? So I don't know. Help me. I'm very good talking about this. Okay.
I have two questions about the first project. First of all, you mentioned that this was you presented part of it as part of the James Joyce project. It was part of some the maps and cartography of modernism, and certainly the punning on Anthropocene as Anthrobscene, indicates that. I was wondering whether you could speak about, however, the anthropophagy stuff has a very surrealist feel about it. Can you
Has a what feel?
Surrealist feel.
Oh.
Can you talk about the influences of surrealism in this? Or maybe I'm just imagining it. The second thing is, you used to teach at Santa Cruz and you lived there. I always think of the Santa Cruz school in terms of the study of the Anthropocene, people like Anna Singh and Donna Haraway. Can you talk about how influenced you are by them, or how your work contributed to that kind of research?
Yeah, absolutely. Donna Harriet gave a talk, which I could hardly get into because the room was packed, and so I had to stand outside the door. But she did in that talk introduce the word Anthropocene and began to really work with that after that talk. But she had already been thinking about this and suggested the absurdity, but also the sad tragedy of having to say that we were the new dinosaurs, and then that we had brought it on ourselves. And so this is a project that she introduced, and I began to think about the Anthropocene. And of course she has suggested other words for this new era of ours. But I think it is the Anthropocene, whether we like it or not. So I've been decided to call it Anthrobscene. Yeah. It's obvious. Huh? And then the surrealistic or the speculative aspects of the work, I've always been interested in working with that, because that's the twisted way of taking a look at the world. But this manifesto is playing with the Oswald de Andrade's manifesto. But he's a poet, so he probably would have he wouldn't have put in all of the statistical information about the Amazon forest, which incidentally the copy editor at McSweeney's very carefully researched to make sure that I had the numbers right and miles and all of that. It was very irritating, but she did that. But the idea is really Ronaldo's idea, because one day at dinner, he's always telling these crazy stories, and so here's a story. And he starts telling me that this is the way we're going to save the Amazon. And I'm not really paying attention, but then I said, you can't have said that. You did not say that. And I thought, oh. And I said, oh no, I'm eating my dinner. And then I began to think about it. And I thought, that's it. It turned everything in my mind and said, what if we do work with this? A modest proposal. And that's how it started. And then, of course, with the Joyce Conference. The Joyce Conference, I was invited there because of the Tropical Orange. And when these invitations happen to me, I always say, I read Ulysses many years ago, but I never understood it. I want to make it clear that I'm not a Joycean. Why am I going to your Joyce conference? Why have you invited me? And say, no, it must be wrong. Please get somebody else. Go away. It will be very embarrassing to come to your conference. And then I forget her name, but the woman who invited me said, no, I teach your book all the time. I'm going, what? Tropical Orange, it's a Joycean book. I was like, oh, news to me. It was like, oh. And then she began to talk about the comparison to Ulysses and to the time frame and the careful moving through the city. And of course, that's what happens in Tropical Orange. It's moving to the city. It's a very carefully, time frame. And then I'm experimenting with genres, and he's experimenting with voices. So I had to go to the conference.
Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, I wanted to congratulate the Asian Research Center. This is tremendous. Congratulations, and I'm so jealous. And congratulations to you, Katie, and everyone who worked on this residency. My questions are, I have two questions that are really, really simple. I'm really interested in what you're doing with the genre of manifesto. The other one that I've been trying to think with and figure out and follow you is, of course, Anime Wong, which I think is a conversation with Donna Haraway and Cyborg Manifesto. So,
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Sorry.
Donna never talks to me, but anyway. But I'm talking to her all the time. Yeah.
And then the other, again, if we can, because we saw a lot of images, and I would love to just hear you go through. I know some of that is Ronaldo's and obviously Tim's, but if you could talk, and a lot, and I think in the first one also, I just love all your PowerPoints, and you're my supermodel icon. I do my PowerPoints for my classes. So if you could just kind of talk about the images that we saw, it'd be great.
All right. Well, most of the images are stolen from the internet. They're all stolen, and so don't keep this up on anywhere too long, because it's really embarrassing. And because I'm always talking to classes and academic crowds, it's okay that I steal them, but you can't use them for anything else. But I was really interested in looking at maps. So the theme for the conference was Cartographies, Joycing Cartographies. And so I began to think about all kinds of mapping. But of course, and I was told that my Lotus or my Excel broad spreadsheet was also a map, and I think of that as a map. So there's so many maps, and I was interested. So the mapping of the Amazon in all those different ways, I was looking for that. I was looking for all the ways in which it's mapped. So that's that. But then I had the satiric, whatever that is, the interludes of eating. And then I wanted to know how I could do that. And so Ronaldo, I go to sleep late, but he wakes up at 5. And by the time I wake up about 10 o'clock, he's got 5 more paintings, or he's done more art. And I go out there and I go, well, how is this happening? And while I was dreaming, he dreamt this stuff up. And I don't know the meaning, and he can't explain it, and we can't explain his art. But I always think of, many times it feels like a cartography. Feels like, and maybe he could say by himself. But so I thought, can I use this? And I would say, show me some stuff. And he'd say, want this? Want this? Okay. I said, yeah, give me that. And I would take pictures, and that's what happened. So the interludes where you saw were his examples of art, which over the many years has all these renditions. So yeah, and is that it? Okay.
Manifesto.
Oh, the manifesto. Yeah, I don't know. I just, since Andrade said that his long poem was a manifesto, to be or not to be, and really declares Brazilian culture and art for Brazil, and this delinking of Brazilian culture art with Europe, and particularly I think it was France. That was this moment, and so to embrace the idea of the indigenous. Now, of course, by now we all think this is really an appropriation. But it was the moment, and I think it was the same moment for modernist work. if you think of Picasso and others, of their appropriations. So it is a colonial moment. And of course, I thought that also the conference was critiquing that as well. So it's my reiteration of Manifesto for today, right? But a modest proposal as well.
Are there any questions in the audience? I have one for you. And it's concerning the food. The food that you juxtaposed, with the colonists in many ways. And wondering if there are any linkages that you found also, and why the certain dishes were.
Well, all of those they are Brazilian. They're Brazilian kind of dishes, like the tapioca. But I had to find pictures, and I had to, I couldn't make that stuff, right. But I love food, so that was fun to do. But a manioc stew would be, I think it's a potato root that you know is probably yuca. But for the Brazilians call it manioc. So that was a manioc stew at the butt of, and the tapioca is from the manioc plant, and you can make these very, very thin crepes with it, which if you go to the north of Brazil, they fill with coconut and sugar. It's really wonderful. Or, sweetened condensed milk. Yeah. What else was there? I don't know. Oh, it's fully around. And then, of course, the rice. I could have gone on, done rice.
I love the descriptions. Okay, so I think we will, if there are no more questions, we're going to move. Oh, one more in the back. Okay.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, but also your entire body of work. This is kind of relating back to the question about scale, which is, I was so struck by thinking about the parallel between the big meteor and Trek as a journal, right? Because, and I was really struck by what you said about the remnants of that meteor as something that survived a long journey. Like you said, it made it to Earth, both in the terms of surviving and traveling to Earth. And it's easy to say, okay, the meteor is the planetary and the intergalactic, and Trek is the personal and the familial, right, in terms of the personal scale. But there's something for me about Trek, that if you think about Trek as not just a journal, but as a manifesto, right? So the way that
I love
it
that.
itself is doing all these forms of time traveling, right?
Yes.
Trying to excavate the past, record the present, the unrealness of that present, and then it was a kind of a wager into an unknown futurity, right? So it's not good. And so I'm wondering if we could also think about something like Trek as magical and cosmic and intergalactic.
I love that. Thank you. I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you.